Very fresh. All right.
Got a lot to learn.
Interesting failure we're going to look at today is loss of both hydraulic systems. Now, the first thing with loss of both hydraulic systems is that in the QRH, it doesn't look like a very big exercise, but if you really go and look at the details, it becomes a very, very big event. Now, I know a guy who's lost both hydraulic systems in an Embraer 145. I've lost on the Embraer 120, the number one or the left hand, the green system. It's not such a big issue if you lose one system, but if you lose both, it becomes a totally different kettle of fish. Just have a look here for us in the QRH, loss of both hydraulic systems. There we go. All right, so as you lose both hydraulic systems, of course, you're going to go to manual reversion and the, thank you. Maybe turn it a little bit more. Just a little bit. There we go. Should we just a little bit more? Cool. All right, so losing both hydraulic systems, first of all, the hydraulic controls are going to go to manual reversion. So it's going to be very, very tough. Now, there are three ways to control the aeroplane. Either with the rudder, or with the asymmetric thrust, or you can do it with the ailerons. The ailerons are going to be very, very tough. If you use the ailerons and put a lot of strain in your arms, if you use the rudder pedals, it's a bit overactive. It starts to tend to like roll around a little bit. And if you use the asymmetric thrust method, that it moves quite slowly, but it's more controllable. You can choose the way you want to do it. Feel what works the best for you. That's why we want to do that exercise. Then, that's the first thing. So first of all, when I fly the aeroplane, make sure we're flying in a controlled manner, so we can manually change anything on the aircraft. We can change the pitch attitude, we can change yaw, we can change the trims, we can change all the stuff, speeds, configuration. Once we're on full positive control of the plane, then we'll start looking at the problems. You are going to get some EFIES warnings. They're up here. Hydraulic system failures. The second you see hydraulic system 1 and 2 fail, you must know that all these other things are going to happen because of that. It always works in a hierarchy. Whatever's on top, like a DC bus failure. DC bus fails, depending on which one you get like 23 messages, and it's not all those things at the same time, although it's not guaranteed that it can't happen. You can't prove that it can't happen. And then if you go and look at the highest thing inside them, find a DC bus failed, that's why the rest of the stuff cascaded all the way down. Okay. So that's the first thing that's going to happen. Things to look out for, it says airspeed, maximum 250 knots. It gives you a bit more of a controllable aeroplane. If your speed is too low, you need big control inputs. If your speed is too high, it's oversensitive. Then, a couple of things we need to look at. It says caution. Multiply the flaps 45 unfactored landing distance by 3.45. Now, therein lies our first problem. So, if we're looking at basically a max landing weight aeroplane, we calculate that. We don't have to go into the QRH for this, but I'm just going to give you the numbers. You need 9,000 foot on a dry runway. If you've got a wet runway or contaminated runway, 4 millimeter standing water, or wet runway, you need 23,000 foot to stop the airplane. So obviously, we don't want to land on a wet or a runway like this. There's a couple of other compounding factors that are going to come into play with that, but this already shows us things change. So when we have this failure, keeping this in mind from what we're doing is we must immediately start looking at runways. Now, up there in Nigeria, I think most of the runways are quite long. You've got Kano, you got Ilorin's quite long as well. Lagos, of course, no problem. So there's a bunch of long runways, so you shouldn't have a problem. You guys usually have isolated rain and isolated thunderstorms, so there should be a runway somewhere that's open. Abuja also being one of them. Then, second thing, looking at that, 3.45 times the unfactored landing, this is going to equate to a speed of between 150 and 160 coming over the fence. That's huge speed. Now, it's not a regimen that we are used to flying in. Problem with this is that the aeroplane builds the air cushion underneath it. And when we come into land, inside here in the QRH is going to say, caution, do not flare. I think it's on the next page, depending on what QRH you've got. There'll be a caution note. You see it there? Caution, do not flare. Okay. The reason for that is following. As you're coming into land, because you're coming at such a big speed, if we do our normal landing technique, and there's something we need to make very clear. The guys always make a joke, say, a good landing's definition is one you can walk away from. A soft landing is a crap landing. It's the worst landing you can make for two reasons. A couple of reasons on top of that. If you do a soft landing, we transition to level with the runway, we float, we touch down quite deep. shortening our stopping distance, increasing the pressure on the brakes, increasing brake temperatures, increasing risk because you're at a higher speed and you touch down. So those things aren't good, as well as when we touch down softly, we eat up the tires, and also we don't dissipate energy, or not a lot of energy. What you should be doing is flying all the way down, aim to the point where the poppy lights intersect the runway. And as we're only going to reduce the rate of descent on a normal landing now. We'll get back to the hydraulic failure landing. We pitch 2 degrees up, because all you want to do is you want to reduce your rate of descent. You don't want to land the aeroplane, you want to just reduce the rate of descent. So as you're coming in 750 foot a minute odd, as you're coming into the flare just above the runway, you just, as the controls come back for 2 degrees pitch up, the thrusting is closed at the same time. So one movement. So you're coming down, dissipating the energy, and then you're putting the plane down. And then you've got it in a touchdown zone, which is exactly where we want it, which means you've got a lot longer runway that you can stop in. Lower speed at landing, more direction, more runway for stopping, less wear in the brakes, less heat, less wear on the tires, and less risk. That's where we want to be. Okay, that's point 1. Point number 2, if we come in at 150 to 160 knots, we're going to be bouncing on the air cushion. Now, we don't really feel it in this airplane under normal circumstances, but if you come in like that at this high speed, and we do this technique, we try to do a soft landing. Now, the thing is, as I said yesterday in the other briefing, when we get task saturated, we do what we usually do. We usually aim for a soft landing. You're going to be very task saturated here. So the chances of us going back to what we usually do, which is a soft landing, is very good. So we must consciously concentrate on flying the airplane down, literally just putting it down on the ground. We do have training in suspension, so we can put the plane down quite positively, and it won't be a problem. When we do this, if we do the flaring technique, the soft landing one, the plane literally bounces on the air cushion. Because the plane's flat at the bottom, and my little Miss Muffet airplane, it's flat in the ground or flat at the bottom, so it compacts the air in between here, builds an air cushion, which then keeps the plane not only away from the ground, it literally bounces on that air cushion without even touching down because of the swing. Also, I can't remember the calculation, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's about 90 meters per second that you're traveling if you're coming in at these speeds. So you're eating up runway quickly like that. So we don't want to do that. Now, when you're over the page, you see there's a block over here. This block here, whenever you see a block, we must focus on each item in the block and assess and consider the effect of that item on the aircraft and what we're going to be experiencing. The first one there is normal gear extension. Right. We do not have planning for alternate gear down flying at 250 knots. It's going to eat up the fuel. Probably not going to make an alternate because it's not planned like that. So we must be very sure when we want to put the gear down that we are going to land, or as much as possible assured. Nothing is guaranteed. But it suggests about 15-mile final approach. The first officer will have to do the selection, the manual override. Remember, there's 2 switches inside there, or a lever and a switch. The switch is there if the lever on the instrument panel doesn't work. It's electrical, but you must have quantity and you must have pressure. Then the other one is the override, is the emergency extension, which is a free-fall lever. You pick that lever up, it opens all the valves in the hydraulic system relating to the gear. If you're standing underneath the airplane on jacks, and you pull that lever, you can literally put the wheels in and out and just cycle them like that. Then comes the problem. Whenever you do that, point number 1, I would suggest about 15-mile final approach. Gives you enough time to do it. Follow the QRH in the procedure because it says you exactly how to do it. 15-mile final approach, and then get the gear out. Then must consider that when the gear is out, they might not be properly locked. There's no hydraulics to lock them in a down position. So when we do that, once you come to a stop, stand still. We must, and we'll talk about the radio conversation just now, we must notify maintenance, they must be ready with pins. You want to land, stop the airplane straight, wait for the pins, put the pins in first before you do anything. Do not turn off the runway because you have a chance of a gear collapse. When that happens, you're probably going to have to evacuate, which we don't want. Evacuation is uncontrolled. We want to deplane the aircraft. Okay. Then, next one is thrust reverses. So what's that going to influence? Yeah, deceleration. Now, once again, when we get task saturated, we do what we usually do. Now, we are accustomed to a certain amount of deceleration feeling when we land the airplane. This situation is going to task saturate us, plus we're going to have a split cockpit as well on top of that. So the chances are that our brain is mentally going to look for that same feeling of deceleration. So we have a tendency to overapply brakes, which we don't want to do, but we must consider all this. So thrust reverse is exactly as you said, going to increase the landing distance. Anti-skid, what's that going to influence? Same thing. Now, the thing is, how much deceleration can you actually absorb? We don't know. Depends on how heavy the airplanes. Depending on the surface you're landing on. If you're landing in Maputo, they've got a a concrete runway with grooves cut in it, it's got very good braking capacity. But if you're going to land in a runway that's used a lot and it's got a lot of rubber on it, different story. Now, we don't know how much deceleration we can take, so there's a technique we're going to use here. Once the airplane has touched down, we must immediately use the emergency/parking brake. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever tried it, but usually few pilots have tried that thing. Yeah, I think I've done it before. Yeah, cool. So usually very few pilots, but we don't want to take it like that. Very few pilots, especially captains. For co-pilots, it's very difficult to pull that emergency parking brake. So what the captain should do is either use his forefinger or his thumb and pick the lever up until he feels a bite. Now it works the same as a car's parking brake. So if you pull a car's parking brake up softly, you will go to a braking action. If you pull it up all the way, it'll lock the wheels. So we don't want to lock the wheels for obvious reasons, which we'll also talk about just now. We want to slow the airplane down. Now, the landing is going to be like this. Once you've touched down, the captain is going to apply the emergency parking brake. And he's going to apply it cautiously. What you should do is your aiming point is not to stop the airplane now. You want to decelerate the airplane at the lowest rate of deceleration so that you will be standing still by the end of the runway. The reason why we say that is because we don't know how much we can pull. And you won't even feel if the tire is dragging. You'll just hear the pop and then you've got a secondary and tertiary problem. Touchdown, start applying the emergency/parking brake, looking at the end of the runway at what rate it is approaching us. Make one application. No, don't let it go. Make one application, look at the rate of the runway's end is coming, and then either apply a little bit more or release a little bit. Taking into account that you have 6 full parking brake applications here out of the accumulator. Now here's the issue. Do you have a pre-flight check for that accumulator? How do you know how good that accumulator is? These accumulators leak. We don't know what the leak rate is. The maintenance guys might know on a C check or on one of the checks, but we don't have that information easily available. Plus, depending on the leak rate and how long you've flown, that thing might not have 6 pulls, might only have 4. You've got no other brakes. So if you try and start doing this, you're going to lose the brakes completely and you've got no brakes. Coming over the fence at that speed, that's not what we want to have. So we must touch down and aim for the end of the runway. I would almost say, don't quote, but I would almost say the nose wheel must be touching the grass on the other side of the runway. That's your aiming point, because that's going to give you a lowest rate of deceleration. Picking the longest runway, which is going to give you a best chance for this to be successful. So, apply the brake, either thumb or forefinger. Check into the runway, thinking I must be standing still there, not stopping. I must be standing still there. And then apply it, see how much. Is it too much? Is it too little? And then readjust it and then keep it there. That's one thing. Then, normal brakes. Exactly. Normal brakes. So landing distance becomes a problem. Controllability also becomes a problem because now you can't use differential braking. With this anti-skid, because you don't have anti-skid protection, on a parking brake, in any case you don't have it, but on the anti-skid protection, we don't know if the tires are going to be dragging or not. That can give us a Concorde situation. So if you've got the tire bursting quite close to the fuel tank, can rupture the fuel tank, that fuel can go through the engine. Fire is the next problem. It'll be a massive fire because now you've got to pull the fuel probably where you stop. Fuel is going to spread, evacuation becomes a problem, smoke, breathing, all that stuff becomes a big problem. Then, spoilers. Same thing. So we're going to have a longer runway. We're going to need a longer runway to bring the airplane to a stop because we can't put all the pressure on the wheels that we'd like to. Once again, exacerbating the situation because we know what it feels like to decelerate. And because of this, we're going to have even less deceleration. So the feeling is going to be even more abnormal than we're used to. So the tendency will be then to naturally, because of task saturation, pull the parking emergency brake even more. Next one, steering. Now, how the heck are we going to steer this airplane on the ground? First of all, because we're coming in at a high speed, we will be able to aerodynamically steer the plane at approximately 80 knots, and we're also taking into account the slower the plane goes. It's a formula that we must take into consideration. The effectiveness of the controls is a combination of basically two things: the speed and the deflection of the control. If speed has the value of 1, deflection has a value of 1, the effectiveness of the controls will have an effect of 2. If speed is 0.5, for the same deflection, we're getting less effectiveness. So as the plane is decelerating, we're going to have less rudder effectiveness, and we're going to be expecting the plane to turn the same way, but it'll change as the speed changes. At about 80 knots and below, you're going to have to use a different technique to keep controllability of the plane. We don't have centerline necessarily. If we can, it'll be great. The problem is going to be we're going to have to use differential thrust. Now there lies another problem. Whenever we apply differential thrust or any thrust at all off the touchdown, we're going to make our stopping distance even more. So we want to use as little as possible thrust to maintain straight line. Now, the captain does the landing. First officer is going to be in control of the captain does the landing and is in control of the braking. First officer is going to be in control of the directional control, the thrust levers. So you must use as little as possible to keep the airplane on the runway. It's going to be your responsibility to do that.
Okay, because the captain thinks that
exactly, you're tied up already. You're tied up.
In such a situation, would it be wise to use both hands?
Yes, absolutely. Use both hands, keeping both thrust levers closed and only using one at a time if need be. Because you've got no reverses anyway. And also don't want to use reverses because controllability will become the next problem. It will exacerbate it. Then the last one to consider is main door retraction. I don't care. Doors open. Passengers need to get out anyway. So if we do open the door, it's not going to be an issue for us. Now, radio communication with all this, we need to talk to ATC, inform them of it. It's going to be a mayday because it's a controllability problem. TCAS RA needs to go to TA only because you're going to struggle to avoid other aircraft. We must talk to the aerosters, of course, brief them, and we must brief the passengers on what's going to happen. In the radio communication, we need to tell tower with the mayday, and we need to inform our ops guys that they must get maintenance out. We must also tell the ground guys that they must watch for fire or smoke because these brakes are going to get very hot. So if there's fire or smoke, they must call us from the ground because we've got no fire and smoke detection in the aircraft for the brakes, unlike the Embraer 120, but if the wheels are out, you're not going to get it. So we won't know necessarily that the tire's on fire until something goes wrong. So it'll be good for the ground guys to be informed that they know to tell us, I see fire and smoke, and then we can do the evacuation, God forbid. The other thing we must do communication-wise with the passengers, of course, remember we don't say emergency, we don't say problem, we don't say anything that could possibly upset them, because then the last thing you want is a cabin that's landed and everybody's crapping themselves and then you've got pandemonium in your hands. It's happened before where the guys were so scared they all just got up. Now, if you do have an evacuation, aerosters can't move in between seats in the aisle to see where the evacuation point is going to be. So it can be a huge problem. So communication must take place, and then get a plane to the ground, bring it to a stop or bring it to a standstill, have the guys look out to see if there's smoke or fire. Now, together with that, we've got an additional problem. We've got 4 brake packs. This is the left 2 brake packs, 1, 2, and the right 2 brake packs. And I call them packs because it is a set of friction plates and steel plates. Problem is these things are inside the wheel hub, inside the rim, so there's not a lot of airflow going through them. So cooling is going to be an issue. They're not open air like cars. If it does happen, God forbid, that we over apply the emergency / parking brake and we lose one of the 4 sets of brakes, we lose that wheel's braking efficiency. Let's say our braking efficiency is 100% with all 4. You lose 25% of your braking efficiency. Now, it's not exactly, but you can then basically add 25% onto your landing distance or your stopping distance because you've got 75% instead of 100%. Plus, this is going to create a severe controllability problem, which means you're going to add more thrust, even more than what you need to, because you have to have the brakes, otherwise you can't bring the airplane to a stop.
Because so 2 sides will be braking more than one.
Exactly. So now you're going to make the landing, the roll even longer. We don't have calculations for that, so we don't know. So rather let's not venture into a situation that we've got no data on. Try to make sure that we don't burst the tires. I'll rather run off the end of the runway at 20 knots than go off the side of the runway at 80 knots with this situation. Okay. So it's a pretty serious thing. Also, if the captain commands a pilot flying, they get very tired because there's a lot of work to handle those controls. It's a good idea for the captain to play with it a little bit and then to hand over and take turns. Take over the first officer, fly a bit, back to the captain, back to the first, back to the captain. So the captain is rested by the time he lands. Your idea is also in here to land at the runway, and it also states here in the QRH, to land at the runway with possibly, hopefully, no gusting winds or crosswinds, because controllability is going to be a big problem. When you're coming in a crab, you can't one-wing load properly. When you're coming in a crab, controllability is going to be a severe issue. So we would like to land the runway, you can just land straight. As long as possible, good surface and good emergency services that are up to standard. Now, some places, I believe some places you fly to are not really equipped big time for a situation like this. So they don't have to train, we don't train like that, but we have to have a runway that's properly equipped. So if we do have a situation, we do have a fire and have to do evacuation, or God forbid go off the runway, then there's enough fire services and emergency services to assist us. Okay. A tug will be arranged by maintenance. They'll meet you there with the tug. Once the airplane's in a standstill, we're probably going to put the pins in, maybe tug the aeroplane off the runway and then deplane the aircraft, depends on your country's ways they do things, but they're going to have to tug the aeroplane back to the stand because you can't operate like it. Okay, any questions?
Okay, and I see this is done at flaps 22.
Yes, flap 22, VRF 45 plus 30 knots.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be a very fast landing.
Approach will be VRF 45 plus 30 for that weight.
Yes.
Flaps 22.
You're looking at anything between 150 and 160. Big speed. Lots of issues with that big speed. And the problem that we have as well is we don't know what the situation is exactly going to feel like until the day that you're really getting to it. And then we want to try and avoid or try and negate any of the risks, or all the risks if we can. Most of the risks will be negated, but there will be some risk factors that we won't know about. Okay.